Today I've got my hands on two epic zoom lenses. I've got the brand new RF 24-105 f2.8 and the classic 28-70 f2. But which of these lenses is the king of portraits? I'll do various tests comparing things like the focal ranges between these lenses, as well as things like sharpness, but also usability, because there's a little bit of difference in how the weight is distributed between these lenses. So I'll talk a bit about what it's like to use both of these lenses too. So I did the comparison in studio using some constant light from the SmallRig RC350D just to keep things as consistent as possible when comparing these two lenses. I'm trying to decide between these two lenses myself, so I'm really interested to see the results. So now let's take a look at how wide each of these lenses can go, and we'll compare 24mm on this lens against the 28mm of this lens to see the difference in field of view. And as you can see, a surprising amount more of the scene is captured at 24mm as opposed to 28mm. Side by side, you can see the trade-off is between capturing more of the scene at 24mm on the 24-105, or the extra background separation you get from the faster aperture and tighter focal length of 28mm on the 28-70 lens. For me, 28mm is generally wide enough, but you might be shooting, say, events or weddings and be shooting indoors in tight spaces, or maybe you're shooting a large group of people, and at that point that extra 4mm of wiggle room can really make a big difference. So now let's compare each lens at key focal lengths at their maximum aperture to compare things like background blur and overall rendering, and let's get started at 35mm. And it's at these wider focal lengths that you can see the biggest difference in rendering for me. The 28-70's faster aperture gives a smoother focus fall off into the out of focus background and makes for a more almost 3D looking image over the 24-105. I must say though that the 24-105 looks very clean and very sharp though, but we will look a little bit more into sharpness later on in the video. Now moving on to 50mm, the differences do begin to diminish a little bit. To me, at 50mm, the 2.8 lens has more than enough background separation. Yet the 28-70 renders the busier details of the background a little bit smoother, but the crisp micro contrast of the 24-105 really makes that image pop too. Just look how sharp the model's hair is on the 2.8 image, for example, on the left. Now onto 70mm, and again the 24-105 is bitingly sharp, where the 28-70, thanks to the faster aperture and slightly reduced sharpness, does render a really pleasing look to me. Again, I do think the 24-105 is the cleaner, clearer image, but the 28-70 just kind of has more character to it. But of course, the 24-105 goes beyond 70mm to two more key portrait focal lengths, being 85mm and 105mm. Whilst we're at it, here's a quick look at the difference in the working distance between 70mm and 105mm for the same shot. So to really make use of the extra reach of the 24-105, you're gonna wanna make sure that you have the extra space available to you to play with, especially if you're gonna be using this lens indoors. Okay, let's start by looking at 70mm versus 85mm. So shooting at 85mm 2.8 does close the gap between the two a little bit. The 70mm f2 image still has the smoother background, but notice how the 85mm 2.8 image seemingly pulls the background closer in the image, thanks to that longer working distance. And now let's take a look at 70mm versus 105mm. The results are starting to get very close now, and if it wasn't for that pampas grass in the background of the image being rendered a little bit smoother by the 28-70, I would say that you're getting about the same background separation between the two now. So I really think 105mm 2.8 has about the same amount of, say, 3D pop as 70mm f2, but it is a bit of a trade-off because at 105mm background elements can be more prominent in the frame, so they do still have a different look. And it's worth bearing in mind that conventionally speaking, people tend to prefer 105mm over, say, 70mm for that classic head and shoulders portrait shot. I've tested this before, but here's two headshots, one at 70mm and one at 105mm, where you can see the differences in how the face is rendered. 105mm generally flattens facial features, where at 70mm facial features like the nose are a little bit more pronounced, which is why people tend to steer you towards longer focal lengths for a more flattering look for this style of portrait. But at the end of the day, there are no real rules and it's all down to personal preference, and personally out of those two images I preferred the look of 70mm and so did the model. But what do you think? Which one do you prefer? Now before we get on to comparing sharpness, I'm just gonna take a sec to let you guys know that today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. Whichever lens you choose, you're gonna need a website to showcase your shots, and to me, for photographers, there is no better option than Squarespace. You don't need any prior experience or knowledge in, say, coding, designing or building a website to create your own awesome looking site. Thanks to Squarespace's intuitive fluid engine, you can get up and running fast, and most adjustments are as simple as drag and drop. The Squarespace offers amazing customizable photo galleries that are really easy to set up, so you can be showcasing your work to potential clients in no time. And if you have products to sell, whether that be physical or digital, well then Squarespace still offers all the tools you need to build your own shopfront quickly and easily. So if you're ready to dive in and start creating your own perfect website, well, head on over to squarespace.com/James Reader and use the code James Reader for 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Right, okay, let's get on with the rest of the comparison. Okay, now let's compare sharpness between the two lenses at their key shared focal lengths. And starting at 35mm, in terms of sharpness, the results are extremely close, but the 24-105 has just a little bit more micro contrast. This carries on over again to 50mm, where generally they are pretty much impossible to tell apart. From their widest focal lengths to around 50mm, they really are almost identical in terms of sharpness. However, at 70mm, the 24-105 pulls ahead drastically. The 28-70 really does soften up a bit at its longest focal length of 70mm, where the 24-105 is just getting started and still puts in a really great performance. In general, the 24-105 2.8 is the most consistent zoom lens I have ever used in terms of sharpness at each and every focal length, all throughout the range. There's none of that conventional drop-off of sharpness at the longer focal lengths that you get with pretty much every other zoom on the market. I mean, look here at 70mm on the 28-70 versus 105mm on the 24-105. The 24-105 is zoomed all the way out here, just like the 28-70, and it is significantly better. It is worth remembering that if you're willing to step down the 28-70 to 2.8, well at that point then at the wide end it's probably going to be sharper than the 24-105, and at the long end the results will probably be pretty much identical. But to me, you are buying these lenses to use them wide open. That is their appeal, and that is why they carry such huge price tags. But I'm afraid it's not all good news with the 24-105, because all of that versatility comes at a cost when we start looking at the lens corrections. At their widest focal lengths, the 28-70 is the much better corrected lens straight out of camera, whereas the 24-105 relies significantly on digital corrections in post to have an even acceptable looking image. The 24-105 does start to clean up a little bit by, say, 35mm, but still, even after corrections, it suffers way more from vignette than the 28-70 does at equivalent focal lengths. Now onto handling, where although these lenses are pretty much identical in terms of weight, I found them to handle quite a bit different in the real world, and after around about a 4-hour shoot, I found one of them much more uncomfortable than the other. But taking a look at the lenses first though, the 24-105 side by side with the 28-70, you can see that the 24-105 is the much longer lens, whereas the 28-70 is the much wider lens. And holding them side by side, the 24-105 feels lighter in the hands just because of how the weight is distributed when you hold it. There are some key differences between the physicalities of these lenses. For example, the 24-105 has a clickless aperture ring, A first for Canon on this kind of a lens, and a huge hint that they had video shooters in mind when developing this lens. It also has extra switches to control the built-in lens stabilization, which is something the 28-70 doesn't have, as well as these really useful function buttons. Now, one thing I really don't like is how loose feeling the zoom ring is on the 24-105. It doesn't have the smooth, dampened zoom ring of the 28-70, and to be honest, every other RF zoom lens I have ever used. It's really easy to accidentally adjust the focal length just through normal use. So I definitely wish it had just a little bit more resistance like most other RF zooms have. The RF 24-105 does zoom completely internally, however, making it more weather sealed and less prone to, say, dust compared to the externally zooming RF 28-70. But on camera, on something like the R5, I just generally found the RF 24-105 to be really uncomfortable to use. It's a long lens and a lot of the weight is distributed towards the front element of the lens, so you constantly have that weight pulling the camera down, and it just became uncomfortable after a while. And to be honest with you, after a 4-hour shoot, I just couldn't wait to put the camera down. The 28-70 is heavy too, of course, but because it's a shorter lens, it keeps the weight closer to the camera body, and it just feels a little bit better distributed in actual use and is a little bit more comfortable, to me anyway. A battery grip or using a camera body like the Canon R3 would probably mitigate this problem, but if you're thinking of buying the RF 24-105 2.8, I would definitely recommend renting it first and giving it a try out and see how you like the handling of this lens. And to be honest, the same goes for the RF 28-70 as well, because these are both very heavy lenses, so it's definitely worth seeing if they are for you before making the purchase. So final thoughts on these lenses, and it really comes down to this. If you are looking for versatility, consistency, and ultimate sharpness, well then in that case the RF 24-105 2.8 is probably the winner. But if you want really pleasing prime-like rendering in a still shorter but really useful zoom range that happens to be awesome in low light, well then in that case the RF 28-70 f2 is the winner. There's obviously a little bit more to it than that, such as the RF 24-105 is probably an amazing lens for video thanks to its built-in stabilization and the aperture ring, but a 28-70, despite it not being quite as sharp, offers to me a more pleasing organic look at the cost of a shorter zoom range. But which one would you choose? Let me know down below in the comments which of these awesome zoom lenses you would be choosing if you had a portrait shoot. Personally, I really had my eyes set firmly on the RF 24-105 2.8 when it was announced. But since having it in my hands, now I'm really not sure at all, and I'm trying to make this decision myself. Anyway, I really hope this comparison helped. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, please like and subscribe if you can, because it really does help the channel. And I will see you all in the next one.